What is Database Health Monitor? Well, Database Health Monitor is an application that I've built over the last about, a dozen years or so, since 2011. And it started out as being a DBA. I had my handful of queries that I would, whenever I worked on a new server, I'd bring in this batch of queries and run them against that server. Then I was working with a guy who said, well, why don't you take those queries and put them into some reports? So I started out and I took a bunch of those queries and put them into SSRS reports. And at that point in time, it was really like brand new SSRS, at least fairly new. It was really cool the way we could make them look good and with some charts and diagrams and stuff like that. But then as it evolved and I started working with more and more other servers, it became a bit of a challenge to say, well, every time we want to go work on a different server, I've got to take this batch of SSRS reports and deploy them over there and get everything connected. And SSRS at that point just didn't scale to something that was what I could use to do what I wanted to do with Database Health Monitor. So it wasn't that long, maybe in the first year, that I converted it from SSRS reports over to an application that you install and run as a desktop application. You run it, and anywhere that you can connect to a database, like for instance, anywhere that you use SQL Server Management Studio to connect to that database, you would use Database Health Monitor to connect to that database. Now, that's kind of where it came from, but what is it? It's a bunch of reports and monitoring and tracking and things that will keep track of what's going on in your database, or reporting on things that need help. For instance, we have the thing called the Quick Scan report, and what it does, it goes through and analyzes your whole SQL Server and looks at recommendations around security and performance and stability and backups and all those kind of things, and it comes back with a report of here's all the stuff that you could do to make your server more stable, run faster, more reliable, more secure, things like that. We also have in Database Health Monitor a lot of live reports where we can go and look, and it's really handy when you're working on a brand new server to be able to go look and say, okay, what's the biggest database and what's the biggest table in there, and what are the tables that the biggest indexes? What are the tables that have indexes that aren't being used? What are the tables that are heaps that are not clustered? Things like that. So it's a quick way that when you're looking at a database to be able to go in and familiarize yourself with what's going on with that database. Now, beyond just the reports, which kind of map to queries that just get run and show you stuff about what's going on there, we have the concept of historic monitoring. And what the historic monitoring does, you turn it on, and it creates a small database where it's going to track information locally as to what's going on with your SQL server. It's going to track weight statistics. It's going to track the queries associated with those, the database associated with them, the user associated with them. It's also going to track CPU utilization and the number of blocking queries and things like that. That's the kind of thing that once it's installed and running, it runs and tracks and keeps track of what's going on with the SQL Server right now. And what's cool about that is when somebody comes along and says, hey, there was a problem on the SQL Server yesterday at 3 p.m. Can you look and tell me what was going on? Well, prior to something like this, the answer was, well, gee, I can look at the logs, and if there's nothing showing up in the logs, well, there really wasn't anything going on. But with the historic monitoring through weights and blocking and things like that, we can go and look and say, these are the queries that were running at this point in time by these people, and these are the problems that we were seeing. This is why, this is what we could do. Maybe here's an index we can add, or here's a query that needs tuning, or something that needs to change. Anyway, it's super useful. We use it in all of our performance tuning engagements as a way to be able to go and figure out what's wrong with the server and how do we make it run better. Then beyond that, part of Database Health Monitor, we also have a SQL Performance Monitor, which is an option you can turn on that is going to live track and monitor right now what's going on with your SQL Server, what's blocking right now, and alert you on it. What's missing indexes could have helped with that blocking right now. How many users are on the system? What's going on? Who's doing the blocking? Things like that. And that's a tool that evolved from me when I would do like live performance monitoring for customers where they want me to track and keep track of everything on the server and make sure it's running good during some big event or some special day with a product release or something like that. And when I originally started doing that, I would have 5 or 6 or 8 different windows open. And what I've done now is try to merge all that into one application so that I can just start up Database Health Monitor and turn on the performance or the SQL Performance Monitor, and it will give me all the stuff that I previously used to have to go to 8 or 9 or 10 different windows to be able to track when I'm monitoring a live database during a live event. Anyway, Database Health Monitor, free to download. There's classes available. Check it out at stedman.us/download. Alright, so now for the quick tour of Database Health Monitor. Once you get it installed, it gives you a list of all the SQL servers you're connected to. Here I have several that are disconnected because those are test servers that are offline right now, but let's just take a look at the ones that are connected. So here we have one called Steve18/SQL 2019, and when we click on that SQL server, you can see across the top is these blue bars that show historic weights. Go in there and click on a day and see, okay, well, what's going on with the weights? And we can see here's kind of the day-to-day chart, and if we zoom in on today, we can see hour by hour there's varying weights during the different parts of the day, but the biggest ones are coming from these specific databases: email marketing and marketing assistance, quick scan history. Well, the quick scan history was a CheckDB. That was probably the one earlier in the day, but these other ones are SPOA method, which is what's used to call a web service. So that's just kind of an example that quickly we can drill down and see that there are points in time where we can find different queries that are having different types of weights. If we double click on this one, update blocking by hour, we can see that it's mostly parallelism because it's CX packet and CX consumer are the weight types. And that's something that happens on the server pretty much every day. Now, this is a test server. It's got a lot of weird stuff running on it, so don't assume that any of this is really a problem necessarily. If we take a look, let's go back and look at this other one, SQL Server. This is running SQL Server 2022. If we look at the historic weights, we can see there's different things going on with this one as well day to day. And if we go look at, well, here's an example of one. We can double click and see there's this common table expression that's doing this specific work with an order by and selecting and whatnot. That's got a resource semaphore, CX sync port, and CX consumer. So there's definitely some work going on over time there, and that there's some blocking going on around that resource semaphore, it looks like. Okay, let's take a look at a few other things. That's kind of the quick tour of the historic weights. If we take a look, we can look at things like, oh, well, what's the blocking by hour look like? We click here and we can see that on this database, wow, this one is actually has a fair amount of blocking going on a daily basis. The 100% is the specific point in time that has the most blocking, and then everything else is relative to that one. It does not mean that 100% of the queries were blocked in that hour. It just means that that was the one with the most blocking and everything else is relative. With this also, we can take a look at things like CPU load by hour and see here, and this is my desktop we're looking at here, so there's some things that might be a little bit more variable than a normal SQL server would. Anyway, so that's a quick tour of that. We also have the ability to do things like go and drill down on a database and look at reports like inefficient indexes, and these are indexes that have lots of updates but not many seek scans or lookups. We can look at things like, do we have any partition tables? How are the statistics doing? Oh, look at this. We've got some out-of-date statistics that need to be rebuilt. So I can just create a script to rebuild them all, copy and paste that script, run it in Management Studio, and we're good to go with our statistics there. Looking at table size, we can kind of go and see what are the biggest tables in this database. And this is oftentimes really a game changer when it comes to understanding what's going on with a specific database. Oftentimes it's the biggest table that has the most issues over time. Anyway, that's kind of the quick overall tour of Database Health Monitor. There's way more here than I have time to show in that short blurb, but check it out and let me know what you think.